Dear Hallmark, there's no bigger fan of your movies than I am, especially your Christmas specials. I can't wait for them to begin, and I'm so happy they now start earlier. I gotta hand it to you, Christmas in February. Wow. And how do you come up with such original storylines? It simply amazes me. Please, more movies about quaint but charming kingdoms around the world where the citizens are as white as the snow and all speak impeccable English without an accent. And a dashing, lonely prince falls in love with a flirtatious marketing executive who has a questionable past. Those reconciliation scenes at the holiday ball are so suspenseful. And that night in the blue igloo with the roaring fire that doesn't melt the ice, OMG, that is biblical. I know you must get a ton of suggestions for new movies, but have you ever considered one about a lighthouse keeper? They lead such fascinating, romantic lives. Alone on a rocky coastline, climbing hundreds of steps every day to deliver the whale oil that keeps the light burning. Imagine the possibilities of a visiting tour guide who's stranded at the lighthouse by a sudden snowstorm and taken in by the shy, boyish lightkeeper. The tension, the heroism, the despair when they realize their supply of caramel pumpkin spice latte is running out. Will she make it back to the mainland in time for the Humans for Hedgehogs pet rescue benefit? Will she persuade the reclusive lighthouse keeper to be her escort? Pretty strong plot line, if you ask me. Please let me know when you begin casting. We can talk about money then. Sincerely, your biggest fan. Well, it might be some time before Hallmark premieres this blockbuster movie. But to tide you over, I've thoughtfully prepared a sermon on this same topic. You see, my family spent the Labor Day holiday in Door County. I must tell you that even a 3-day weekend is barely enough time to partake of all that cherry pie, cherry strudel, cherry wine, cherry martinis, and very cherry fudge. And I left some cherry out. But we did manage to squeak in a few other activities, one of which was to visit the Cana Island Lighthouse, which was first lit in 1870. Visual aid. Cana Island is on the lakeside of the peninsula in Bailey's Harbor. It's a tiny trapezoidal-shaped island hanging by a finger of land out in the lake. And getting there is something of an adventure. You climb up into an old hayride wagon pulled by a tractor and bounce and pitch across a rocky causeway about a quarter-mile long and arrive on this gorgeous island. The grounds are impeccable. There's a beautiful new visitors center, and the lighthouse has been painstakingly restored. It's still a working lighthouse, by the way, and thanks to today's technology, needs only a 200-watt light bulb and its original Fresnel lens to guide ships safely to harbor, freeing the lighthouse keeper from the laborious task of climbing 97 steps to refuel the lamp. On an idyllic summer afternoon, with nary a cloud in the sky and gentle seas, it's tempting to romanticize the lighthouse life. But the interpretive material placed around the grounds makes it very clear that the living conditions were not always hospitable, and the job of lighthouse keeper was often quite demanding. The climate could be severe year-round. Standing out on the lake, the lighthouse was exposed to the lashing of storms from all sides. In fact, during the winter months, if the lighthouse keeper had a family, they were probably likely to spend it on land, especially if the children were in school. So the life was isolated, and often the lighthouse keeper did not even have an assistant. He was responsible for everything, too, not only tending to the light, but also routine maintenance and upkeep. He certainly didn't get rich on his salary. In 1882, there wasn't even enough money to pay assistant keepers, and they were all laid off. But hey, at least the work was dangerous. In addition to having to climb those steps over and over, the lighthouse keeper was literally playing with fire. Until the advent of electricity, the lamp was lit using flammable substances, whale oil, lard, mineral oil, kerosene, and the like. And above all, the lighthouse keeper was shouldering a heavy responsibility. He had to keep that beacon shining during the shipping season no matter what, because who knew what mariners out on the lake were depending on its steady direction? Wait a minute. Harsh conditions, exposure on all sides, working alone, lousy pay, awesome responsibility. Doesn't that sound like the lot of a guest preacher? What really resonated with me about the presentation at Cana Lighthouse, thinking of today's texts, was the respect paid to the lighthouse keepers. Well deserved, you would probably say, given their duties. I visited other lighthouses, however, and not perceived quite this level of near reverence for the lighthouse keeper. At Cana Island, keeper was not just a job description, but a title of honor. They referred to Keeper Julius Warren or Keeper William Sanderson as we might say Mayor Johnson or Pastor Donna. Our gospel text this morning pays respects to a keeper as well, the shepherd. Now we know that shepherding was a familiar analogy of Jesus's, to the point of his making a direct comparison in the Gospel of John. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. In today's gospel, the shepherd goes to great lengths to search for a lost sheep and rejoices when it is found. Jesus likens sheep to the little ones and warns that they should not be treated with contempt. Well, who exactly are the little ones? Is Jesus referring literally to children? Or his disciples who sometimes display a tender faith? Or believers struggling with their faith? Biblical interpreters make plausible cases for all of these possibilities. The important takeaway is that the shepherd keeps his flock. Whether children, disciples, new believers, hesitant believers, you or me. The shepherd keeps watch over his sheep, protecting them from danger and searching for them when lost. In the Old Testament reading this morning, Joseph keeps his arms open to his brothers instead of holding on to anger and resentment. The lighthouse keeper makes sure the lamp stays lit, a steady beam to guide sailors in the night. Who has watched over you like a shepherd? Who has kept faith with you like an older brother? Who has kept a guiding light lit, a steady beam, like the keepers of Cana Island Lighthouse? I came across a recent piece in the New York Times, which many of you know is one of my favorite theological journals. It's by Tish Harrison Warren, an Anglican priest who writes a regular column on faith and life. Here, she's eulogizing another clergy person, Tim Keller, who was pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Manhattan, who had just died. Despite having significant differences about theological issues like the role of women in the church, the two had developed a deep friendship over the years. Tish Warren describes it this way. 6 years ago, out of the blue, Keller emailed me. I had published a controversial piece and was being hammered online, a common occurrence these days for any public writer, especially one who, like Keller, doesn't fit neatly into left or right boxes. He wrote simply to encourage me, to tell me to keep my chin up and keep writing. It meant the world to me. After that, Tim became a chief source of cheerleading and guidance in my life. A protective older brother or father figure, a life coach, and a spiritual sage combined. Over the past few years, any time I was being piled on after a controversial piece, my phone would ring and it would be Tim, just checking in. He wanted to hear how I was feeling, to encourage me, and then to discuss ideas and theology. Mostly, Tim wanted to talk about hope and beauty he found in Jesus and how we might best communicate that hope in our moment. I also think of my wife, Nancy, as a bringer of light, especially in one of her roles, that of medical director for the Jewish home on the East Side. She told me the story of how touched she was when a husband of one of her patients called her a mensch. Now, I'm not sure how familiar that term is outside the Jewish community, but it is one of the highest compliments. It speaks to her talent of not only providing medical care, but also being a noble human being, serving and doing for others. Even small gestures count in bringing the light. I usually end my runs at the grocery store near our house so I can shop for any needs we might have and then walk home. A few summers ago, I badly miscalculated my ability to outrun a coming rainstorm. As soon as I reached the store, it started to pour. I thought I'd just wait it out, do my shopping, and hope it was just a passing shower. But it wasn't. So there I was, standing with my bags in the entryway, looking for any signs that the cloud might break and I could walk home. While I was doing that, an older African-American fellow came in the store. Several minutes later, he came back out. Apparently, he had only needed a few things, and he looks at me and says, "Do you need a ride?" I told him I wouldn't turn it down, and he says, "Come on." Now note that he didn't ask me how far away I lived or anything of the sort. So we get in his car, and it's only a couple of minutes to my house, and when we arrive, I thank him profusely and say something like, "I hope I didn't inconvenience you." And he looks at me and says, "It's never an inconvenience when you can do someone a favor." On a stormy day, that was truly a Jesus ray of light for me. We should celebrate those who have been keepers of light to us, turning up the wick when we needed it, sparking us into action, enlightening us with wisdom, guiding our way forward. But that's only half the story, right? We aren't just recipients of the light, we are keepers of it ourselves. Keeper Bill, Keeper Beth, Keeper Jim, Keeper Vicky, Keeper Ellie. You may not think you are. You might feel your light is dim, but Jesus sees it differently. I'm reminded of another passage in Matthew where Jesus is talking about the end times and welcoming the faithful into the kingdom. And here's why. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was homeless and you gave me a room. I was shivering and you gave me clothes. I was sick and you stopped to visit. I was in prison and you came to me. That's from the Message, by the way. What are you talking about, you say? I just brought some donuts to Power Shift, that's all. I wrote a check to the food pantry. I gave Jan a ride home from church. No sweat, no big deal. But it is. You're taking those steps up the lighthouse. You're keeping the light on. I like how the Message phrases another passage in Matthew. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. And now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. Now, just in case you want a refresher course on how to do this, a reading from St. Paul, well, sheds light on it. In my professional work, I do some writing for lawyers, mostly family lawyers, And if St. Paul were my client, I would promote his services as a mediator. He's often working to bring factions in the early church together to help them respect their differences and find common ground in Christ. Don't get hung up on the different customs you bring into the faith, he tells his Jewish and Gentile believers. Don't pass judgment on the other, because God has welcomed them in. I need to hear that, because too often I'm exactly the kind of person St. Paul is addressing. I'd rather be right than conciliatory. I'd rather judge than accept. And when I act this way, at the least, I am shrouding the light of Christ that I should be reflecting. And at the worst, I dim the light of another, diminishing their spirit or their worth. At times like those, I can only take refuge in the reassurance the psalmist speaks this morning. God has not dealt with us according to our sins, nor repaid us according to our iniquities. So great is God's steadfast love. Well, lighthouses have mostly become obsolete. Some remain as unoccupied automated light stations. Others have just gone dark, superseded by satellite navigation. Many still stand, though, as proud relics of another time, symbols of an age when anxious sailors searched the night skies for that first pinpoint of light that would only grow stronger, welcoming them home. And the role of keeper has changed too, to that of preservationist, as civic organizations and agencies work to maintain lighthouses for their historical and architectural value. So what are we to make of this lighthouse standing at the crossroads of Christ and culture, and us keepers who tend it? Are we obsolete, mired in the ways of the past, scaling stairs because that's all we know how to do? The church is changing, and these shifts cut across all denominations. The evidence is impossible to ignore, as just blocks away from us, Summerfield United Methodist Church is closing its doors, or has already done so. In a little more than 2 months, on the first Sunday of Advent, Village will celebrate our 56th anniversary. There's no doubt that we have been a beacon during these years, a welcoming and safe harbor for believers and seekers of all stripes, an open door and warm light in the night hours every other Friday for any who need respite, a well-stocked bag of groceries that helps lighten the load of poverty, a lens into the creativity of art and liturgy. But there's legitimate concern about our future. Our resources to keep the lamp lit are dwindling, despite some generous gifts. And those steps up to the top are looking more and more daunting. Despite all the changes, the need for keepers of the light of Christ in this city hasn't diminished. It may even have intensified because of the changes. But what form should that take? Village has established a sustainability task force to explore all the options for keeping the light on. Could that mean partnering with another nonprofit in ownership of this building? Working with a developer to become part of a larger commercial project here in downtown? Combining with another congregation? Or imagining what a village without walls might look like? We're not alone in this task of envisioning a future for the village. Synod and its leadership are firmly behind us. Outreach for Hope has consistently provided us with financial support. And Commercial, their annual fundraising run walk is September 30th, coming up soon, and you can ask Tom more about that. And Interchange and the Food Pantry are partners in mission with us. It's going to take each of us lightkeepers as well, each according to the blessings God has given us, to discern God's will for our future. In the early days, keepers of the lighthouse at Cana Island had to ascend those 97 steps several times a night to bring oil to the lamp. Bearing light is a commitment, to be sure. But the light itself, it's weightless. May it rest on you lightly. Grace and peace to you, keepers of the light.